While his little girls slept peacefully in their beds at home, their father would be prowling the night, looking for other men's daughters to prey on. He made chilling, mysterious calls like this one to his victims. You wouldn't see him coming, but he knew everything about you. Before he attacked, he would turn your house into his twisted playground. He studied family photos, learned names and phone numbers. He thrived on fear. He was evil in human form, something straight out of a horror movie, a monster known by many names. But for more than 40 years, it looked like his real name would forever be a mystery. And then, out of the blue, in April 2018, they got him. 72-year-old Joseph DeAngelo, the single most violent serial offender in American history. The people he targeted had no idea what they were up against. Since June of 1976, there had been a string of rapes on the east side of Sacramento, California. The attackers struck multiple times in a single neighborhood before moving on to the next. Single women or women home alone were targeted. Sales for locks, dogs, and guns went through the roof as people armed themselves against a guy wearing a ski mask and a t-shirt. In November, the police, hoping to calm the public, hosted a forum to talk about what was being done by the police and what could be done by the public. During the meeting, a man got up and started talking about how the rapist was a coward by targeting women on their own. He berated the men, calling on them to step up and protect their women. But you never know who's listening. 6 months later, police responded to a call. It was the man from the meeting. His wife had been assaulted and raped while he was tied up on the floor of their bedroom. 2 years earlier, and 200 miles to the south, police were on the trail of a thief with an M.O. unlike any other they'd seen before. Between 1974 and 1976, he'd racked up a shocking 120 break-ins in the small farming community of Visalia, California, earning him the nickname the Visalia Ransacker. He pried the screens off the windows, and once he was inside, he did weird stuff, like arranging women's underwear in patterns and only stealing things with sentimental value. But on September 11th, 1975, something happened that would mark an escalation in his crime, a preview of the horrors to come. The night began like any other night for Joseph DeAngelo. He was casing a house to break into when he passed the window of 16-year-old Beth Snelling. At that moment, something shifted for him, and he climbed into her window. At around 2 a.m, Beth awoke to a man standing over her bed, pointing a gun at her and telling her to stay quiet or he would kill her, and she was so afraid that she did what he said. What he had planned for her was anyone's guess, because he never got that far. Claude Snelling, Beth's father, had been awakened by strange noises in the house and went to see what was the matter. What he found was a man in a ski mask taking his daughter through the garage, a gun in his hands. And Claude tried to fight the man, but was shot twice for his effort. And his rampage was only just beginning. In 1976, not long after he was almost caught, he moved 3 hours north to Sacramento. That's where he evolved into something even more dangerous. He was a police officer in Exeter, only about 15 minutes away from Visalia. The force was small back then. There were only about 10 officers, and they were close. But Officer Joseph DeAngelo didn't pal around with his fellow officers too often. Guys who were on patrol with him would later remember him as serious and standoffish, but smart. He talked a lot about rising in the ranks, maybe even going into the FBI. So when he moved up to the Sacramento area, they thought he was on his way to bigger and better. And in 1976, he took a job as a police officer in Auburn, about 30 minutes east of Sacramento. He was an Army kid with 2 brothers and a younger sister. The family moved around a lot, wherever his father happened to be stationed. After high school in Folsom, California, he joined the U.S. Navy, where he served for 22 months in Vietnam. In 1973, he got married to a woman named Sharon Huddle. They were legally married up until his arrest in 2018, and together they had 3 kids. All daughters. And while his little girls slept peacefully in their beds at home, their father would be prowling the night, looking for other men's daughters to prey on. But it was different now. He was different. Break-ins weren't enough anymore. After his experiences in Visalia, the botched kidnapping, the unplanned murder, his methods changed and his evil grew. On June 18, 1976, a 23-year-old woman was asleep in her family's home. Her mother had passed away a year and a half ago, and her father was out of town, leaving her alone. After the attack, he ransacked the house before leaving. Because she was still tied up, she had to knock over a phone to call for help. She was his first. The reign of the East Area Rapist had begun. 49 more victims followed. His hunting grounds were upper middle-class neighborhoods with well-kept fenced-in yards, detached garages, and neighbors close by. He liked the challenge. At first, he targeted single women. He often followed them for days or weeks before he made his move. He learned their patterns. He noted when boyfriends, husbands, and fathers would be gone, and there were times when he would break in just minutes or hours after they left. His 10th victim was a 15-year-old girl. She was home alone after deciding at the last minute to skip a Christmas recital with the rest of her family. She lived through that hellish night, but she never played the piano again. He went on to another victim and another and another. There was no pattern they could follow. Sometimes attacks would happen a week or more apart. Others would happen within days of each other. As he became more and more notorious, he started paying attention to the media. Less than 2 weeks after one newspaper reported his victims were only women, he switched to couples. When the couple was tied up, he would separate them, the woman in the bedroom and the man in the living room. But to keep him from breaking free, he would stack dishes on top of him so he could hear it if he moved. He tormented them by pretending he'd left, then attacking again when they made a move for the door or the phone. His sick games were part of the reason he was never caught. The scared couple would wait for hours until they were sure he was in fact not in the house anymore before they dared to move. He would speak in low and high voices, sometimes using an accent to disguise his voice. Some victims told police that he would break down and start crying "Mommy, Mommy" as he paced around the house. Others heard him chanting, I'll kill them," from another room as they laid tied up waiting for the nightmare to end. But it just kept on. Then in 1978, he graduated to murder, and it seemed to happen almost by accident. Brian and Katie Maggiore were taking their miniature poodle Thumper for a walk around 9 o'clock on the night of February 2nd, 1978, when they crossed paths with Joseph. It's not clear if they were the target or if they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but their lives ended about 2 blocks away from their home. With his ski mask pulled down over his face and a gun in his hand, Joseph chased the couple through their neighbors' backyards. He shot Brian. Katie made it a little farther and tried calling for help before he caught up to her and shot and killed her too. Then, suddenly, in the summer of 1979, they stopped completely. Why? What would cause the most prolific serial rapist in California to just vanish? Well, he didn't vanish. He was suspended from the police. Joseph Jr. couldn't keep his impulses under control during the day, and he was caught and arrested in July for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. Knowing what you know now, you can imagine exactly what he was planning to use those for. And it got him fired from the Auburn Police Department. All of his access, all of his intel, all of the privileges being a police officer afforded him, gone in a flash. The East Area Rapist had disappeared. In his place, Joseph became the original Night Stalker, and his brutal streak of murders began. In December 1979, not long after Christmas, a young couple knocked on the door of their friend's condo. The 4 of them had a tennis match scheduled, and neither Robert Offerman or Deborah Manning were picking up the phone. When neither one of them answered the door, they walked around to the back and found the sliding glass door open. Over the next 7 years, 4 more couples would be. Sometimes they were shot. Other times they were bludgeoned with whatever he could find that was large and heavy enough to do the grisly job. At first, police didn't connect the murders. One victim's husband was suspect number 1 for years. Other murders were blamed on a local career criminal involved in gang violence. When he turned up dead later, the investigators thought the matter was closed. For 5 years, there were no rapes or murders, but he wasn't silent. He made a game out of calling some of his victims. He'd say things like, "Remember me?" just to make sure they were still afraid. And then, in May 1986, he struck again. 18-year-old Janelle Cruz. Her family was on vacation and she was home alone. As it happened, the house was up for sale and the realtor is the one who found her body in the morning. She was his final known victim. And then everything stopped. There were no more rapes or murders with the telltale signs pointing to the Golden State Killer. Now we know that he was raising his family and working for the Save Mart grocery store, a job he took in 1989 and held for the next 27 years, according to allthat'sinteresting.com. It wasn't until the early 2000s when one man made the connection between the DNA found in the East Side rapist cases and DNA that had been left behind in the murders. Investigators figured they had nothing to lose if they threw a Hail Mary. DNA genealogy services, the kind where you can send your personal DNA to find out more about your heritage, were becoming hugely popular. And they had DNA from the Golden State Killer, but they never got a hit in any police database. So they submitted it to the genealogy service to see if it would be a match. And to everyone's shock, they got a partial hit. Unfortunately, there wasn't any direct match, but potential cousins did pop up as relatives. It took 2 years to narrow the suspect pool down to just one person. 72-year-old former police officer and retired mechanic, Joseph DeAngelo Jr. But narrowing down the potential suspects from family trees was hardly the slam dunk investigators needed to catch a killer who had eluded them for so long. They set up a detail to follow Joseph, and they were able to collect a tissue he had thrown away. It was sent off for testing against the DNA left behind at the crime scenes. Everyone waited with bated breath to see if one of their longest, cold cases, a serial rapist and murderer, was finally about to be brought to justice. And it came back a match. After more than 40 years, the Golden State Killer was finally caught. And thus closes one of California's darkest chapters. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., the Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, the original Night Stalker, and now the incarcerated for life. If it wasn't for the dogged persistence of investigators who wouldn't let the case die, he might still be free.